Welcome back to another episode of our Pipeline Survey Techniques mini-series. Today we're going to look at ACVG. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to find more of these videos. ACVG is one of the oldest techniques for coating integrity surveys, and it dates back to the Pearson survey, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. The Pearson survey is named after the guy that developed it. It is probably the oldest of the pipeline integrity management surveys that takes a continuous survey of a pipeline. And the other surveys that have been around that sort of length of time initially were point-by-point surveys rather than continuous surveys.
Right.
So the ACVG survey, or the Pearson survey as it was initially known, works in one of two ways. It actually has two different modes of operation. The first mode involves injecting an AC signal onto the pipeline and then walking over the pipeline, measuring the strength of the AC signal that is radiated from the pipeline. And in that way, it is actually more of an AC attenuation survey. So just like the PCM was primarily an AC attenuation survey, but could be used in ACVG, so the Pearson survey can be used in attenuation mode. But in terms of actually pinpointing defects, the survey technique used two operators about 10 meters apart, and they would have conductive boots or boots with conductive spikes walking along with a cable in between the two operators. And the one operator has got the receiver, which then detects the AC voltage between the front and back operator at a distance of 10 meters. And so if you're now walking along the pipeline and you go over a defect where the AC signal is discharging to earth, you will see a sudden sharp increase in the signal strength. And then as you continue walking, you'll see a sudden sharp increase again in the signal strength. So you get this distinctive double peak in the intensity if you were considering that you were walking at a constant speed.
Right.
Because the first one happens when the first operator goes over the defect, and then
the second one crosses.
10 meters later, the second one goes over the defect and you see the same peak. So one of the benefits of that survey is that you have this redundancy or check that you have to have this for it to be a valid indication. You have to have this double peak characteristic. Now, if you were to record the output of a Pearson unit, which you can do, and just record it with time, and you then plot it out as a function of time and assume that you walked at a constant speed, it will show you these peaks. And they look like two horns of a gemsbok, or an oryx for those of you who don't live in South Africa. And it's very, very characteristic in that regard.
Now, for those of you who haven't already caught on, an ACVG survey stands for an AC current or alternating current voltage gradient survey.
Correct, yes.
Which is the modern form, I suppose, of a Pearson survey.
The modern terminology.
Or modern
yes,
terminology.
Yes.
Now, how does an ACVG survey work, and other than just walking over a defect tethered to your co-operator, how does it work, and what sort of data are we picking up?
Well, it works exactly the same way as a DCVG survey. Okay. So we're injecting an AC signal into the pipeline, and then we are measuring the strength of that signal. The only thing that is particular about it is that the measurement is continuous, and the instrument that is measuring it is tuned to the signal so that it only picks up the frequency of the injected signal and not other random frequencies that may be floating around. And other than that, I mean, essentially the technique is the same. When you have a defect in a pipeline coating, the signal, whether it's AC or DC, will discharge to earth, and it will create a gradient in the soil in the immediate location of that point of discharge. And by surveying over the top of it, either with two pairs of boots in the Pearson survey technique, or using the A-frame in the PCM equipment. A-frame is two electrodes that are about 1 meter apart. You measure the gradient between those two electrodes.
Okay. ACVG surveys don't provide directionality. How does this impact your results?
Well, you're absolutely right, because AC is flowing in both directions all the time, and so you can't see which direction it is at any point in time. So it means that the gradient can only be evaluated on intensity. And that certainly was perhaps a drawback of the Pearson survey, is that I know from having done one myself in some very sticky, clayey conditions in England, where my boots got progressively heavier and heavier and heavier because the clay stuck to the spikes, yes. But you identify a defect literally by going backwards and forwards over the defect. Going over it. Whereas the PCM, although it is an ACVG technique, it has a special frequency characteristic that allows it to determine the direction. Okay. So it's not a simple sinusoidal waveform like you have in the Pearson survey. It's got this fancy waveform which allows you to tell the direction. And so when you're using the PCM equipment to do an ACVG survey, it actually shows you direction of the current flow, which comes from the signal generator.
Right.
But the same thing, you are using a specific signal generator that has a specific frequency, and you're using a receiver that has a frequency that is tuned, or the receiver is tuned to the frequency of the generator.
Aside from using heavy boots and the lack of directionality, why aren't ACVG surveys as popular today?
Well, the Pearson survey is not so popular because it requires two people to do the survey. You get a very simplistic result. It doesn't tell you much in terms of size. It's a qualitative thing where you get an indication of size, let's put it that way. It's nowhere near as definitive as the DCVG in that regard. Also, it has limited range.
Okay.
Because it's an AC signal, it is only transmitted a certain distance down the pipeline. You also have a situation that you have to have different frequencies for different coating types. A lot of those difficulties are overcome with the PCM equipment. So although they're using the ACVG principles, they've got the specific aspects of this ultra-low frequency, and that overcomes the distance restrictions. And it also overcomes the problem of not having a direction. The other aspect of the Pearson, and to a certain extent the PCM, when you use it in the ACVG mode, is that it is subject to interference from overhead power lines. You can get overwhelming signals coming in through that. And then the other aspect of the ACVG that we have found is that the ACVG is super sensitive.
Okay.
And because it is an AC system, it picks up anomalies in the ground, magnetic anomalies. So a scrap welding rod in the vicinity of the pipeline will cause an aberration in the field strength.
Right.
Yeah. And that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that ACVG is highly sensitive to overhead power lines. How would operators mitigate these challenges, or would you just avoid using ACVG completely?
Use a different technique.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So if you've got a lot of power lines around, you want to be using a DCVG instead of ACVG.
Okay. Yeah. Now, do you have any other advice to engineers looking to use ACVG?
I would be so bold as to caution anybody using ACVG for defect location, because our experience in that regard is that it is overly sensitive. And we've had many situations where defect indications have been pinpointed, and then the contractor comes along and excavates that location, and there is no defect. And there's no defect to the extent that they've even used a holiday detector on the pipeline, and there's no holiday in the pipeline coating.
Wow.
and yet it was a significant defect from the ACVG survey.
Right.
So I strongly believe that it's a valid system, yes. The older system was the best of its kind originally, but if these days, if you're looking for coating defects, I would use DCVG.
Perfect. Well, I think you have broken down Pearson surveys and ACVG quite substantially, and it's certainly not a survey I would particularly use going forward. But thank you for your time and your experience. And to everyone watching, if you found this video insightful or helpful at all, don't forget to subscribe because we have a whole lot more of these sorts of videos on our channel. Thank you.